All right. Hopefully you have downloaded your charts for tonight. And I'm going to start tonight's class by reading from Zane. I'm reading from Course 10.1, Delineating the Horoscope. And this is from the very beginning of Serial Lesson 103, where he talks about the first 18 decanates. But at the very beginning of that book, Zane describes what an outline of a complete astrological reading should consist of. Outline of a complete astrological reading. Here's what Zane says a reading should consist of. The person receiving the reading should be told just what the birth chart represents. 2, they should be told in connection with each department of life what will be attracted and why, if nothing special is done about it. They should be informed as to the best methods to follow to change the destiny of each department of life in the desired direction. Number 4 is they should be told what a progressed aspect represents. 5, they should be told what events each progressed aspect during the period covered may be expected to attract if nothing special is done about it. 6, in connection with each progressed aspect, the person should be told just what precautionary actions should be taken to cause the progressed energies to attract not what they otherwise would, but what the person desires. Let me move the screen up or down. And then 7, to show that the basis for such information is at hand, the person should be given an accurately erected chart for the time of day of birth on the day, month, and year of birth in the geographical latitude and longitude of birth. That's a lot of information. Could take you about 6 hours. And you will lose the person's attention after the first 45 minutes. If you're incredibly engaging, you might be able to hold their attention for an hour and a half, which is what a reading, a natal chart and progressed reading should actually take. But if you are to go through each and every progressed aspect and describe it, your client's eyes will glaze over and you will lose them. So we try to do what we can from these overall instructions. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a chart. Hopefully you all have your handouts from the very first class of this series, which has to do with the 7 steps in judging. Here's the chart we'll be looking at. This is the chart of a juvenile female born May 16, 2005, 7:58 p.m. in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now with this chart and with the PDF files I sent out, I progressed it to today's date so that we could talk about what's going on now. To progress a chart, you go up to the Tools button at the top of your toolbar. Click on that and you'll actually see Progress Chart. It will automatically come up to today's date unless you have used this chart in the past and you have saved it with a progressed ring. And then it will come up showing whatever the date was that the chart was saved for. So we're progressing this chart to 9/18/2014. And that places the major progressions in the outer wheel. Majors represent the major events taking place. And this is the information that we want to be working with. Now, the other thing you can do is you can create a progression report. And this is putting the cart in front of the horse, but since we might use it later, we'll go back to the Tools button, and we go down to Progression Report. Click on that, and we can see the beginning date, what they call start date and end date. And then I look at a timeline of that person's events, and I work to match up the events of their life with the appropriate planets and houses. So, but we're going to look more short term. We're just going to look tonight forward for a year. And then I'm going to filter the majors. When I look at progressions, I will oftentimes take out the parallel. We'll ignore the long-term outer planets. The reason for that is any aspects from Pluto could last your lifetime. Chances are they're in orb at the time you're born and they last your lifetime. And it's like having a program playing in the background throughout your entire life. And then I like to look at only the most powerful aspects, but I include the sextile as being a powerful aspect. So then I'm going to hit the OK button. It calculates and shows us what aspects are currently in orb for juvenile female. They also show is the date the aspect enters, the nature of the aspect. The first column of planets is always the progressed planet. The aspect formed, the R indicates it's the natal ascendant. And if we look over here, here is Mercury opposing the natal ascendant. And we can see that that stays in orb until April of 2015. So it's pretty much a little under a year. That's how progressions are read. But what I want to do tonight, I want to give you my spiel. When I go to read for a client for the first time, I like to set that up so they have a sense of what I'm looking at. And I'm going to basically give you my spiel the way that I do it. And I'll, introduce myself, and I'll generally go over the birth data, because one of the things I've discovered is I can make mistakes doing data entry. The other thing I've discovered is other people can make mistakes and give you the wrong information. So if the very first thing you do when you sit down with the client, I might say, oh, juvenile female, number 1, it's great to meet you, and today we're going to be doing an interpretation of your chart. And what I'm looking at today is a 2-wheeled chart. The innermost of these wheels is your natal chart. And what that is a map of the heavens for the specific time and place of your birth. And what I have is May 16, 2005 at 7:58 p.m. in Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, New Mexico. At that point, juvenile female may nod and say yes, or she might go, oh, I looked at my birth certificate after I sent you the information, and I actually discovered I was born at 7:48 p.m. Or, no, it was 7:58 a.m. And at that point, you have to excuse yourself and recalculate the chart. So once I've done that, I will then go on and say, now the natal chart is this map of the heavens at the time and place of your birth, and it represents to me as the astrologer a blueprint of your soul, or a cross-section of your unconscious mind at the time of birth. So in this inner wheel, and this is a wheel much like a wagon wheel or a bicycle wheel, only of 12 spokes, in this inner wheel, we have the natal chart. And what we're going to be concentrating on today is the areas that fall between the spokes of these wheels. It's shaped somewhat like a piece of pie, and it is numbered 1 through 12. Each of these sections, which looks like a piece of pie, governs a different compartment of your thinking. The symbols, which you see here, are the glyphs for the planets. And as they fall, both within the signs of the zodiac, as well as within these houses in your chart, they bring very specific influences into each of these areas of life. And what they do is they impact the way in which you may think or feel about these areas of life. And that, in turn, determines the type of events or experiences that you will attract into your life. Now, as you can see at the time of your birth, things were fairly well spread out through your chart. You have planets falling in a majority of the houses. However, there are a few areas that are left open, or what we call unoccupied. There are other areas which are more congested. And one of the things that happens is our attention goes to where the power is in the chart. And oftentimes it does so at the expense of neglecting other areas. Also, at the time of your birth, the planets are radiating their energies towards Earth. They happen to be combining in different patterns. And one of these patterns might be such that the planetary energies are meeting one another head-on within the chart. What this does is this creates within your soul an internal tug-of-war. These are going to be areas of your life where you may feel pulled back and forth over the matters governed by those planets. Others yet might be meeting one another at right angles within the chart. This is a dynamic that's very similar to an obstacle course. One thing we all know about obstacle courses is the fact that no sooner have we leaped over a hurdle than we have another one back in our face. Now, not everything in the chart is traumatic. There are factors that create growth, luck, and opportunities. However, these are things that most of us tend to take for granted for the mere fact that they don't hurt. It's actually the more painful experiences in life that are crying out for our attention. Today, in my summary of your natal chart, I'm going to be referring to this second sheet of the printout, which is titled Astrodynes. The word astro means star, dyna means power. And the Astrodyne report is a means by which I, as the astrologer, can mathematically quantify the power within your chart for each of your planets, each of your houses, and each of your signs. These are listed on my report from the most powerful to the weakest. The advantage of this is primarily for me as the astrologer, in that it will take the guesswork out of the interpretive process. By knowing precisely where the strengths are in your chart, I am able to determine not only your most powerful personality traits, your most obvious characteristics, but these will also indicate those areas of interest or those activities in life to which you are going to be most naturally impelled. Now again, as the astrologer, I'm not only interested in the strengths in your chart, but I'm also interested in the way in which the powers are conditioned. And that is their ability to attract either harmony or discord into your life. So your areas of personal harmony are going to be those areas of life through which you naturally attract in good things with a relative amount of ease. Once we've discovered what those areas are, I may perhaps during this session prescribe activities for you, because the more you immerse yourself in your areas of personal harmony, and this can be done through things such as your choice of career or vocation, through choosing avocations or hobbies, by engaging in specific studies or interest, But the more you're touching, you can choose colors or gemstones. But the more you're engaged in those areas of your life, the happier you are and the more successful your life will be. Likewise, each of us has areas of discord, and discord manifests in our lives as pain. Pain can be from the level of the most excruciating to what most of us experience is milder expressions of annoyance, aggravation, irritation with certain areas of our lives. Now, once we discover where these painful areas are in your chart, you may not necessarily be able to abandon them just because they hurt. But what we can do over time is convert our thinking related to these areas of life, and we can actually lessen the amount of misfortune that we might otherwise naturally attract. That is going to be the bulk of our session today. And once I've completed that, I will be moving my attention to the outer wheel of your chart. What I have in this secondary wheel are your major progressed positions of your planets, calculated for today's date, September 16, 2014. And in a nutshell, I'd like to tell you what progressions are. From the time of birth forward, the planets have continued to move. Throughout our lives, they are forming relationships both between one another by this progressed movement. They are also forming relationships to the planets in the chart of birth. They set up what I like to refer to as astrological weather conditions. This means that throughout your life, you're going to have a timing of events that may be very specific and unique to you. For example, there will be times in your life where you might have sunshine or storms with your health. There are going to be other times where you might have windfalls or losses economically. There will be periods where you might either make or break off relationships, secure or lose employment, as well as numerous other types of activities. So we're going to be taking a look not only at the next 12 months in detail, but we will also be looking at the following 2 years in lesser detail, so that when you leave today, you have a 3-year overview of what might happen. Do you have any questions about the procedure I'll be following? So, what you have just received is basically the setup that Zane requires, what information they need to know. If you record your section, the advantage is the client can go back and listen to that again. And if your clients are also astrological students, which does happen on occasion, they can listen back and also look at a sample of their chart and follow along. So this meets the requirements of providing an outline for the astrological reading. Now, normally what I would do is then go through the process of the 7 steps. But the first 4 steps I tend to not do specifically with the client, but they are observations I make when I actually look at the chart and talk with them about the chart. So what I do is I actually move to steps number 5 and 6. And when I do steps number 5 and 6, I actually combine them. Step number 5 is note the chief ruler of the house. When there is more than one planet occupying a house, the planet closest to the house cusp becomes the chief ruler. All other planets, including the planet or planets ruling the sign found on the house cusp, become co-rulers of the house. When a house is unoccupied, the planet or planets ruling the sign on the house cusp becomes the chief ruler of the house. Intercepted signs mean latent qualities. Now, I've given you keywords for each of the planets. For the sun, vigor, moon fluctuation. Where Mercury falls in the chart, we have thought. Venus, gratuities or gifts. Mars brings strife to the house it occupies. Jupiter brings abundance. Saturn, poverty or restrictions or heavy duties. Uranus, eccentricity, or I like to use the word sudden changes. Neptune tends to bring illusion. I always tell people where their Neptune is in their chart, that's where they need to do their reality check. And lastly, Pluto is subject to both coercion and cooperation. Now, step number 6 is note the house actually occupied by the planet ruling the sign on the cusp of each house. Rather than going back and doing this twice, I read a chart, and we'll do an example of this tonight, only with you participating, is we'll go from house 1 through house 12, combining these steps, 5 and 6. Now, if the planet ruling the sign on the cusp of a house falls in another house, we say that that house where it falls, or where it is disposited, exercises the influence of authority, which means if the ruler of your 7th house falls in the 1st house, your relationship matters are subservient to personal inclination or personal interest. If the ruler of your 5th house falls in the 2nd house, matters of love and romance could be subject to influences through money, possessions, assets, or you might make your livelihood through creative matters. And you can go down that list. We don't need to do that. We're going to switch now while we have an hour of time to go through this chart. And is there anybody who would like to volunteer a delineation for the 1st house? You are correct. That is Scorpio. And we have what planet in the 1st house? What are 1st house matters? Self, health, physical body, appearance, personal interest, one's temperament and self-expression. I always start by saying, we're going to start here with the sign on the eastern horizon at your time of your birth, which is known as the rising sign. And anybody who dabbles in astrology wants to know what this is because of the impact of the rising sign on the personality. In your chart, this falls in the sign of Scorpio. Keyword is I desire. Best quality, resourcefulness, and the worst quality.
Troublesomeness.
Thank you. Troublesomeness.
Revenge.
And revenge is a part of that. But the keywords are basically touchstones for volumes of vocabulary that we develop over time, the more and more charts that we do. Other great qualities of Scorpios are, the Scorpion has a stinger, which is poison. But poison in the right amount can also be medicine. So Scorpions, among all the signs of the zodiac, Scorpio and Scorpio rising can also have very healing qualities. And they're oftentimes very attracted to medicine, healing arts, and healing touch, laying on of hands, and other techniques. Who can tell me about the 1st house in this girl's chart? Scorpio, if we look at it in terms of power, is 4th in strength. It has 11.3 astrodynes, of which it is a negative 30 discordynes and ranks as the 2nd most discordant sign in the chart. How will that inform us about Scorpio in her chart when we look at best and worst qualities? The inclination is naturally to go towards the discord. So why don't we throw out some negative Scorpio traits? You said revenge, jealousy, vindictiveness, coerciveness. Scorpio carries the negative qualities of both Pluto and of Mars. Mars we know is aggressive. Scorpios are much like the cat that plays with the mouse. If you've ever watched that, there's something that can be inherently cruel in that process. It's a slow death. This is the slow, tortured demise. Scorpios can be jealous. They can be vindictive. They tend to have trouble with both forgiving and forgetting. So Scorpios can keep a laundry list of things that have happened to them, and later on, for the mother of the Scorpio child, at age 49, the daughter could be saying, well, do you remember the time that you did this, this, and this? So if this was your client, you want to advise them about this. These are things that you may have to look out for in life, because you may be more easily enticed into the negative Scorpio traits. And you always have to be vigilant to the desire to express this. Well, the person with the discordant Scorpio personality might say, well, what's wrong with that? But what's wrong with that is it generally brings pain and suffering into the world, not only for other people, but also for the individual who experiences it. I tend to describe jealousy, revenge, and vindictiveness, the negative traits of Scorpio, much like the experience of putting poison in your own coffee, wanting the other person to die. Who gets hurt? Let's talk about Pluto in the first house. In this case, the ruler of the rising sign falls in that house. So we might say that this girl could be at times somewhat self-absorbed, that she may think a lot about her own personal wishes, her own personal desires. I might call it self-centeredness. I think of selfishness as more of a Saturn trait, but self-absorption. Selfishness tends to be when we want to grab all that we can and screw the rest. Whereas self-absorption is when you tend to be focused in on your own personal interest and desires and don't necessarily take into account that there's actually other people in your family or in your community or in the universe as a whole. Now, anyone with a discordant chart, however, can bring out the best qualities. And so what you want to do is not to tell someone they're a wretch and that there's nothing they can do about it. You want to point out the constructive ways in which this energy might be used. The tendency of Pluto in the first house, if it's discordant, it can tend towards being manipulative and using either force in the sense of being overt, or it can be covert in its actions. The closer Pluto is to the ascendant, this is pretty far from the ascendant, it's almost a complete sign apart. But if Pluto is right up and in conjunction with the first house cusp, it will oftentimes make for a personality that's always pushing the envelope, always testing oneself, always going through extremes of diet or exercise, or seeing if they can stand on one foot with the other foot behind their ear. There is a sense of constantly testing one's physical capabilities. To read Course 16, which is Stellar Healing, it gives the process of calculating astrodynes. The basic theory, I'll give it to you in a theoretical form. The basic theory is certain houses have more power than other houses. These are the angular houses. Cadent houses tend to be the weakest. Certain planets are more powerful than others. These are the luminaries. So the sun and moon have greater power, as does Mercury, than the other planets in the chart. They're allowed larger orbs of aspect when you look at a aspect table. Certain aspects are more powerful than one another. For example, conjunctions and oppositions are extremely powerful, as are parallels. Squares and sextiles tend to be moderately powerful, as do trines. Semi-squares, sesqui-squares, inconjuncts, semi-sextiles tend to be moderate in their expression. You have different strengths of aspects. Also, when planets are forming aspects, what we call applying, when the faster moving planet of the two is moving towards the other planet, it's carrying more energy with it. Once the aspect has become perfect and is exiting orb, it becomes weaker. So the more powerful planets, the more powerful houses, the more powerful aspects, the greater number of aspects, all have a mathematical formula which are calculated. Now that's just for power. Harmony and discord are determined by essential dignity. We also have what are called exaltations. We also have falls and inharmonies. We have essential dignities, which means that some planets express better in certain signs than in other signs. For example, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. The Sun is exalted in Aries. The Moon is exalted in Taurus. And so that adds a little bit of harmony to the planet. There are aspects which add harmony or discord. Certain aspects, such as the semi-sextile, the sextile, and the trine, all add harmony, but of varying strengths, going from weak, being the semi-sextile, to average, being the sextile, to great, being the trine. Likewise, it is with discord. We have 4 discordant aspects. We have the opposition, the sesqui-square, the square, and the semi-square. The sesqui-square, which is 135 degrees, and the semi-square 45 degrees, are weak but discordant. The square, 90 degrees, is moderate but discordant, and the opposition, 180 degrees, is powerful and discordant. So there are formulas for that as well, which are all calculated. To do astrodynes by hand is, 8 to 16 hours, depending on how smart and how fast you are, and whether you have a calculator, and whether you make a mistake early on, and then have to go back and recalculate. So having the computer that can do this in 45 seconds is really a great asset to us. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Now, to also see where the power comes from, one of the advantages of the Astrodyne report is if you look at the aspect graph, we have numbers there. The upper line is the power, and the lower line is the harmony or discord. From that, you can see for each planet not only how many aspects is being formed by that planet, but also the relative power and the amount of harmony or discord. And all of that is being added using the basic standards that I described. All right, let's talk about Pluto in Sagittarius. This is a generational aspect.
Well, Christopher, can I just say that one of the interesting things, and I think this is referencing Astrodyne, is that Pluto being in the first house, you'd automatically think that was quite strong in the chart, and yet it is actually the second weakest.
And yeah, that is interesting, because the normal rule of thumb in astrology is planets in the first house tend to be stronger. But here, Pluto is almost a full sign away from the ascendant, so you don't have the power that would come from a conjunction to the ascendant. if we look down the Pluto column in the aspects, we can see that Pluto forms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 aspects, 6 aspects if we include the parallel of Pluto to Neptune. So that 6 aspects, let's look to see if they are powerful aspects. Pluto parallels Neptune, but it's a fairly wide, so it's only 3.92 astrodynes. It forms a semi-sextile to the ascendant, but again, it's at the outer reaches. This is 2 degrees apart, and semi-sextiles aren't a very large orb. So it only has 1.1 astrodynes. If we look at the sextile to Neptune, it's even less than 1 astrodyne. That is so wide. We have Pluto at 23 Sag to 17 Aquarius. So that's 6 degrees apart in a sextile. If we move up, we can see that there's an inconjunct between Pluto and Saturn. That Pluto's at 23 Sag, Saturn's at 23 Cancer, but the inconjunct is not a powerful aspect. So far of the aspects we've looked at, this is the strongest at 2.2 astrodynes. Wait, even more powerful is a weak aspect known as the sesqui square, which is 135 degrees apart. If you look at the symbol, it's a square plus half a square. So 90 plus 45 is 135 degrees. Yet, because Mercury is involved, it tends to be more powerful, and it is closer to being exact, which makes it more powerful. Now, if we look at the last aspect, Pluto forms an inconjunct, or 150 degrees, from the Sun. That means it's 5 signs away. Pluto's at 23 Sag. 5 signs away could either be 23 degrees of Taurus or 23 degrees of Cancer. They are not powerful aspects, and only one of them is really close to being perfect. But nevertheless, Pluto is in the first house, and its expression will be felt.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Just Pluto's in Sag.
So this is a tone that's being played on the Sagittarius instrument, which can sometimes be blunt, tactless, straightforward, to the point, insensitive, judgmental. Yet Sag also rules the second house. But going back to the first house, one thing I failed to do, there is a second planet that is a co-ruler. Does anyone know what the other co-ruler of the first house might be? Mars, because Scorpio has dual rulership. So we want to look at the position of Mars in this chart, and we would say that personal matters in juvenile female number 1's chart are influenced by 4th house matters. What are some 4th house matters, Andrew?
The home.
Home, family, father.
Travel, yeah.
So this could be a girl that either physically, first house, looks like her father, could have her father's temper or temperament, and or could be with the dominant 4th house, she could be strongly influenced by her father. Mars in the first house is a quick temper, aggressive personality. Right, one thing that the parents of this child would have to be concerned about, and we'll talk about this when we get to the 4th house, but Mars conjuncts Uranus. And that is an explosive situation. Now again, you can have an aspect in your chart, but we are capable of controlling our behavior. Okay, second house, unoccupied, so we go to step 6. And that is, we note the ruler, the planet on the house cusp, Sagittarius. The ruler is Jupiter. Jupiter falls
In the 11th house.
in the sign of Libra. So we would say money matters in her chart are subservient to friends, groups,
Associate.
clubs, one's associates. This can go both ways. With a chart like this is somebody who could either make money from friends or from working for groups, clubs, organizations. Friends could be instrumental in referring her to jobs or giving her work, or in an industry such as, let's say, being a hairdresser, where somebody forms friendships with their clients, and because of that friendliness, they continue to come to you and spend money. All right, the other side to this coin is also, it could make one, as Sagittarius tends to be generous or benevolent, this could make somebody who also tends to give to her friends. There might even be the instinct at times to buy friendship. Jupiter's harmonious, Sagittarius is harmonious, and let's look at the second house, harmonious. In the scheme of things, her second house is the third greatest harmony in her chart. Let's say something nice to her. Girl, you can make money. It's not powerful, which means it's not a great focus for her. However, when she does place her energy in that area of focus, she can do great things with it.
Is it trine Venus?
Well, let's look at the aspect table. If we go down the column with
Yeah.
Jupiter, we can see it forms a trine to Venus. So Jupiter's at 9 Libra. To form a trine, the planet would either need to be near 9 degrees Aquarius or 9 degrees Gemini. In this case,
19.
8 degrees Gemini is pretty darn close. It's a great chart. I mean, having a Venus-Jupiter trine in your chart is a nice asset. You know, we've already dashed her first house and let her know that she can be a little bit of a snarly personality. We need to say something nice and reinforce for her that she's somebody who could ultimately have some luck financially, but that her financial luck is strongly dependent on who she interacts with in the world, the type of friendship she chooses, getting involved in a business that may rely upon social connections as her means of livelihood or income. Any additional insights out there?
The trine of Venus to Jupiter, I think we've already covered that, but it's an air sign as well, both Libra and Gemini air signs. So she's obviously able to trying to attract a lot of support and friendship that would be a great asset to her. You know, the air signs of Libra and Gemini. And because it's in the second house, Venus, the house of public, you know, although Venus is unfortunately also engaged in other aspects, which are not tonight, but that particular one, through well-wishers, 11th house, could be an area that she should really encourage, you know.
Thank you, Michael.
Focus a lot of energy to encourage. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, no, I'm saying thank you. If you have a Venus-Jupiter trine in your chart, you want to encourage it. You definitely want to take advantage of the signs, the houses, which is the environments, the type of persons indicated by those areas. And this is one of the things, knowing in advance, and especially with a young person. You know, I like to look at the astrological chart as the operating manual that unfortunately is shipped separate from the baby. And some people, the manual doesn't arrive until late in life. I had the great advantage of having my chart done for the first time when I was 17 and was able to take the information from that and start applying it in my life almost immediately. I've had other parents come to me where they may have an infant and I'll read the chart. Within 2 years they may be coming back and saying, I must tell you, the personality is showing itself as you described it. So having a child and having their chart, the parent is at an advantage. Some parents get a little confused. and they actually think their children should be like them. And this is the DNA approach. You know, it's my child. They should have my habits, my behavior, my interests, my manners. But the astrological chart gives us the insights as to where they may hold similarities with their parents and where they may be uniquely different. For any one of us to grow in this world and to become who we are, to fulfill our place in God's great plan, we have to go down the lines where we're uniquely different. And the sigh of relief that I've received from many parents over time when they've had their children's charts done is this sense of, oh, they're supposed to be like that. That's who they are. They are so different from me. So if you can figure out what the strengths or assets are and really enhance them when a child is young, we live in a world that pays for specialization of parts and for skill in any area. So if one can start developing their interest and skills early on, they are at a greater advantage when they become teenagers or of earning age or are ready to go to the university and can actually declare a major rather than fumbling about for a couple of years trying to figure out who they are and why they're there, other than that their parents told them they had to go. Third house, mental pursuits, early education, Aquarius on the cusp, Neptune in Aquarius, in the house. So let's talk about Neptune in the third house.
Take a reality check?
Yes, take a reality check. And it may have to do with your own thinking. Person with the Neptune in the third house is a daydreamer. They tend to fantasize. You need to be careful driving with them because their natural instinct is to go on autopilot. They get lost in their thoughts. They can be incredibly imaginative. There's no lack of imagination when you have Neptune in the third house. But it can be difficult in school with Neptune there because the child tends to be more of a daydreamer. They have a tougher time focusing. Now, of course, there can be other factors in the chart. We can't just look at the third house. We also have to look at the strength of Mercury, the aspects received by Mercury to determine one's intelligence. But, at a glance, one might say that this is a girl who's going to have some challenges in early education.
Can that cause a child to be in special education at an early age?
It certainly can, because special education is usually when there is there's either an actual disability, such as ADD or ADHD, or different levels of autism spectrum, behavioral problems, or in this case, the problem can be with Neptune in the third house, the way somebody processes information. The other rulers are Uranus and Saturn, which don't always make for a happy early education experience. And with this child, part of the success for her will have to come through identifying her intelligences and how she actually learns. Does she learn through hearing? Does she learn through modeling? There are different types of intelligences that are actually slowly being recognized, as well as she may have to work with a tutor who helps her to focus and to process information. Oftentimes with Neptune, there can be a lack of focus. With the co-ruler Uranus, Aquarius on the cusp, in conjunction with Mars, 1 degree apart, it also can be a mind that is racing at times or going too quickly, or could have behavioral outbursts in the class, speaking out of turn, things like that, forgetting to raise one's hands, blurting things out, could become issues of classroom management. The father could be a model in some ways, or the discords or trauma or turmoil that goes on in the home could also gain the attention of the child, who's naturally has trouble focusing and is going to always focus on where the attention is held. And the strengths in this chart are the 7th house of one's relationships and the 4th house of one's family.
Uranus in the 4th house would be that they're unusual. They're not like us. You have to make special exceptions for them.
Uranus in the 1st house would be that description, because that describes self. If Uranus is the dominant planet in the chart, that would also describe the person, because the dominant planet is the signature of the chart. But in the 4th house, Uranus's position there may less describe the girl and more describe the father. Uranus in the 4th house can either make somebody who moves a great deal in the course of her life. There could be some volatility or instability in early life. Remember, where Uranus falls in the chart, we experience upheaval, eccentricity, change. So she could have a quirky dad. The best qualities of Uranus, her father could be a genius in some ways. Or he could be somebody who is authority oppositional and just is always getting in trouble because he goes to the beat of a different drummer. So Mars is in the 4th house of home, family, father. Mars in the 4th house can sometimes indicate an abusive situation. This could be where there is anger, rage. This doesn't, and I'm not saying that this is sexual abuse. The sign can influence that. But this could be psychological. There could be rage expressed within the home. Mars in the 4th house could, in some cases, represent a militant father, somebody who may belong to the military, or might have that army sergeant approach to life. Or there just could be a home where there is bickering, strife, conflict. Sometimes Mars can, extremes. I like to look at worst case scenarios, best case scenarios. Worst case scenario could be an alcoholic with a temper. Best case scenario with this could be a scientific or mechanical genius, but it could be somebody who's always dreaming up the latest garage door opener or how they're going to do this or that. But let's look at the 4th house. It is second in power. It has 14.7% of this girl's power. What's important to her? Home, family, father. And let's look at the discord. This is the most discordant area of her chart. Does she necessarily like her home or family? No, one of the things she might say growing up with great frequency is, I hate you.
What about the fact that it's in Pisces?
Very good. Let's look at Uranus
Nebulous boundaries.
and Neptune. There's an MR circled in that square. So yes, Neptune falls in Aquarius, the home of Uranus. Uranus falls in Pisces, the home of Neptune. So there is a type of rapport between those two planets.
Because it's Pisces, couldn't there be kind of a nebulousness, boundary, difficulties, forms her identity, how she identifies?
It could be, though because it's an angular house, I don't think she'll have a lot of trouble expressing her feelings, and since Mars is there. But she may have, we've already determined she has difficulty processing. But Mars and Uranus are both discords in her chart, so that Pisces parent may try to, be sensitive or empathetic, but could actually just push this child's buttons.
Christopher?
Yes.
You have the opposition of Uranus and Mars to the moon.
And what else?
Uranus and Mars. And the midheaven.
Yeah. Look at that.
So there's some kind of conflict with the mother.
Well, when the fourth house planets oppose the midheaven or planets in the 10th house, as we observed a couple weeks ago with Robin Williams' chart, that can oftentimes indicate a tension between the parents. Children want to be loyal to both parents. It's the nature of the child to want to love both parents and to have both parents love. But when there is conflict between the parents, the child oftentimes becomes either like a tennis ball or ping pong ball that's shuttled back and forth between them, or where the child could develop certain things, certain stresses through trying to moderate. Or they may take it personally and take it upon themselves. So there are different psychological approaches to what can happen here. Sometimes, let's say when parents get divorced, some parents cannot help themselves but to say bad things, and parents will talk bad about the other parent in front of the child, which is incredibly undermining and debilitating for the child who wants to naturally love that parent, but they may feel that the parent that has the custody that they have to align with, it's just a very complex issue. So these oppositions from fourth house to midheaven, to the moon, to any planets in the 10th house, which there are none here, can really precipitate. Think of oppositions as the tug of war. In this case, the child may feel like she's being pulled between the expectations of both parents, which are very different from one another. All right, let's move on to the rulers, the co-rulers of the fourth house. Remember Pisces there. So this girl has a really complex family life. Not only is there all the stress from the Uranus and Mars, the very volatile or combustive home life, which might be accompanied by moves throughout her life. We have the benefit of Jupiter, one of the rulers of Pisces, and Neptune. So there's influences in her chart where her home life could be influenced by siblings, aunts, uncles, all which come under the ruler of the third house, neighbors even, and the 11th house of friendships and well-wishers. But overall, looking at this chart, the fourth house is the red zone in the chart. This is the second strongest area and the most discordant area, which means 1, it's painful, and 2, it has her attention. Fifth house, love, romance, creativity, entertainment, the arts. Anyone want to add? Children. Yes, we have 7 degrees of Aries on the fifth house. The ruler, Mars, falls in the fourth. So we'd say that fifth house matters of love and creativity are powerfully influenced by the family. Well, that could be a problem.
Yeah. Christopher, can I back up for a minute here?
Sure.
Neptune is squaring the sun, and with all this conflict, could this child be like an escape artist?
You know, time will tell. But I would say that is something. Yes, she could have a Houdini quality, and that is something to watch out for. She could be an escape artist, or when the sun squares Neptune, one of the things we also have to be careful of is deceit. Sun-Neptune square can make somebody a really good actor or actress, and it could be, oh yeah, Mom, I'm going over to Julie's house, we're going to have a sleepover, and instead she could be smoking cigarettes behind the barn with boys. So, one thing to know about this chart, the 7th house is dominant. So relationships are going to be very important to her. They will be the most important thing in her life.
And
She may not have great examples from her family or home life. So the models may not be there for her, which means that she's going to have to struggle more to find other models in the world.
And the Sun in Taurus,
Sun in Taurus wants what? Stability.
Stability.
they will really take care of someone.
I mean, we're skipping ahead 2 houses here.
Yeah. Can I just say about the fifth house?
Yes,
that,
please.
You know, there must be must be elements of being an impulsive risk taker, because obviously Mars is the ruler of the fifth house, conjoined Uranus. Combine that with with the Neptune in the third, there could be an element of risk taking in her makeup.
Another area, if we think of the 5th house as gambling,
Yeah, speculation.
and the ruler falls in the 4th house, in later in life she might speculate on land, property, real estate. That could be her gamble. That could be her risk-taking. Okay, 6th house. We have Taurus on the cusp. Mercury falls in the 6th house of work and labor. The tendency with Mercury in the 6th house is wherever Mercury falls, it's subject to thought. So this is somebody who will think about her work. For a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, one's work is their homework or their household chores. As we move out into the realm of employment, it becomes our job. She might also use work that involves her intellect, her communication skills. Mercury is in Taurus, so one thing, and with the Sun and Mercury in Taurus, one area to encourage this girl is towards song and music, because that may be where she finds her harmony and is able to process things and figure out a way to make herself feel better.
Mercury is the best planet as well, isn't it? It's the most harmonious.
Indeed it is. Look at that, 27.44. She's somebody who could actually be happy working. And because this girl may not be a scholar, it would be important for her to learn early on what kind of work she wants to do, so she could set about being self-sufficient, working, and being happy working, because working is what's going to make her happy, as will making money and being with her friends. And if she can combine all 3, she'll be even happier.
What about Mercury sextiling Uranus and Mars in the 4th house?
All right, let's look at that. Mercury forms a trine to the moon and to the midheaven, and a sextile to Mars and Uranus. Mercury is very harmonious and becomes in this chart what we call the conciliatory factor, which means it breaks up an opposition and siphons off the energy. The fact that it is her best planet, again, work for her may be the antidote to everything. So if we were the parents of this child looking at this, the thing we would want to instill at an early age, since we probably can't fix the family dynamics, which look really deep-seated and destructive, we can at least offer her outlets where she's going to find her own best qualities, and that's through developing a work ethic and a work habit system. Venus is the co-ruler, and Venus is her most powerful planet. So this is also somebody who's going to want to work in an environment of beauty, artistry, music, the arts, culture, fashion, socializing, waitressing, hosting, bartending. These are all Venus outlets, pastry chef. Now let's move to the 7th house, and then we'll conclude the class for tonight. This is the most powerful house in the chart. It's also highly discordant. It is the 4th most discordant house. When you have a powerful, discordant 7th house, the way I like to describe it is, you can't live with them, and you can't live without them.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yes. The person with the 7th house, powerful, needs to have a mate, needs to have a companion. As a child, we don't have mates or companions, but we can have confidants, best friends, pals, chums, that other person that we are in cahoots with. So this is somebody who may naturally want to form bonds, but her natural instinct is to be social. Where the sun falls in the chart, we look for our self-worth and our self-esteem. And juvenile female number 1 is going to look for that through partnerships.
The Venus in the 7th is part of a T-square with the Moon and Uranus and Mars. And she is in Gemini. So this is kind of a far-out interpretation. Could she be subject to multiple marriages?
Yes. You know, when men have relationships on the side, we call them mistresses. She could have misters. Venus in Gemini has great difficulty loving just one person.
Oh, really?
Yes. Most people are boring. And Venus in Gemini needs stimulus and change and to be engaged. And so that alone creates conflict in a chart. Because if you think of Gemini, Gemini is duality. And it's always going to be questioning the choice. So, yes, there could be multiple marriages. There could be dating more than one person at a time. Though Venus is the dominant planet, however, she will love, and she will love deeply. And many, yes. She will love deeply, and she will love a variety.
Can you say more about that T-square of the Moon?
Yes. We talked about Robin Williams' Moon-Venus opposition, which is a more powerful and more destructive aspect. But when Venus squares the Moon, there is a great tendency towards hurt feelings, going through life having to nurture and nurse one's hurt feelings, of feeling, unloved, or that nobody understands me, nobody gets me, I don't get invited to parties, I feel invisible. And then Venus squares Uranus and Mars. This is a greater challenge. A Venus-Mars squares can sometimes bring in abusive relationships or relationships that are where one is just objectified. And that it doesn't mean that she's being objectified. She could be. But it could also be that she might also objectify others, where the reason for choosing someone is because they're cute, they're handsome, they're good looking, and not looking at the entirety of what might be included in a relationship. And Venus-Uranus squares can oftentimes bring in unconventional romantic attachments or attractions. And that may be sudden, where the relationship can start suddenly and end suddenly. And speaking of ending suddenly, we're gone over time-wise, so we need to bring this to an end, and hopefully you'll want to continue this process next week.
This is wonderful.
So we can get through this chart
Yeah.
and then move on to another chart.
This is great.
All right, thank you all for tonight,
Thank
and
you.
see you, hear
Thank you
you
very much.
next
Thank
week.
you.
Thank you, Christopher.
Fascinating chart.
Linda.